The miracle doctor won't be a kept man. My heart belongs ashore. Chapter 1091. Lindsay Ludwig, worried about her parents' safety, fumbled as she answered the phone. Kiran York, however, remained calm and put the phone on speaker. Ailes's voice came through the phone. If you want your parents' lives, bring me 200 billion. Lindsay's body went weak, nearly collapsing into Kiran's arms. Her family had given all their money to the country. They had nothing left, let alone 200 billion. The thought of her parents being kidnapped filled her with panic and despair. Kiran steadied Lindsay and she looked at him with tearful eyes, unsure of how to respond to Alice on the other end. Kiran spoke into the phone. Ailes, are you lonely in hell without your brother? Do you want to join him? The once arrogant Ailes felt a chill run through his body at the sound of Kiran's voice. However, he suppressed his fear and angrily shouted, Kiran, you're still alive? According to Conte Yasuda, Kiran was supposed to be dead by now. Kiran smirked and replied, Not only am I alive and well, but if anything happens to Lindsay's parents, you'll wish you were dead. Shocked by Kiran's arrogance, Ailes retorted, Kiran, you're too cocky. You know I'm right. Watch and see, Kiran replied coldly, then hung up the phone with a snap. Lindsay, still leaning on Kiran, looked up at him with teary eyes full of confusion. She couldn't understand how Kiran could speak so confidently to Ailes, who held her parents' lives in his hands. Won't he kill my parents after this? She asked. Kiran gently held Lindsay and said softly, The more you show fear and worry, the more arrogant he'll become. By showing strength, you make him cautious, and your parents will be safer. Though Lindsay trusted Kiran, she still felt uneasy and nodded woodenly. Trust me, Kiran reassured her, holding her tighter. Lindsay began to feel a small sense of security, and her strength gradually returned. Lindsay then asked, What should we do? How do we find Ailes? Why should we find him? Kiran asked with a smile. Lindsay, growing anxious, said, How else will we save my parents? If I'm not mistaken, Ailes has already left Dragonsland. Otherwise, he wouldn't be so bold, Kiran speculated. Lindsay looked at Kiran, trying to verify his serious expression. He's already left Dragonsland? Kiran nodded. Most likely. Last time in Dragon City, he was very cautious. He wouldn't have survived this long otherwise. Still anxious about her parents' safety, Lindsay felt even more unsettled. Don't worry, we'll wait for his next move, Kiran said, helping Lindsay to the sofa to wait for Ailes' next call. Kiran knew Ailes would call again. Knowing Kiran was alive would put immense pressure on Ailes, making him fearful. Meanwhile, on a yacht in international waters, Ailes' eyes were filled with sharp, cold determination. Though the yacht had reached the high seas, his expression remained grim, with no sign of relief. Standing beside Ailes, Horace Moore remarked, Kiran is still very powerful. We must be careful. Damn it. I can't believe that Beastard is still alive. It's infuriating, Ailes cursed angrily. Horace shared the same regret and anger. Staring at the sea, he said, I thought he would die at Jade Dragon Mountain, but he survived unscathed. If he didn't die at Jade Dragon Mountain, let's lure him to our western world. We have plenty of experts there. Killing him will be a piece of cake, Alice said, filled with hatred for Kiran, who had killed his brother. Horace, too, was eager. He wanted Kiran dead so he could absorb the dragon vein power from Kiran's body. Thinking about the dragon vein power made Horace excited and impatient. That would be perfect. Let's plan carefully and make sure he doesn't get away this time, Horace suggested. After a moment of contemplation, Ailes dialed Lindsay's number again. Lindsay, still nestled in Kiran's arms, was sobbing continuously, her face filled with worry and anxiety. When the phone rang, her body jolted, and she reached for it. Kiran answered it, pressing the speaker button. Ailes, have you made up your mind to release them? Kiran asked. Infuriated by Kiran's arrogant tone, Ailes shouted, You're dreaming. Not only will I not release them, I'll take them to the west. If you want to save them, I'll give you 7 days. If you don't come, prepare to collect their corpses. Hearing this, Kiran smirked. He knew Ailes was scared, but was also trying to lure him into a trap. Lindsay's parents had become bait to draw him in. Fine, I'll come to the west. Just tell me where, Kiran responded fearlessly. Ailes angrily replied, taken aback by Kiran's lack of fear. Then come to Man City first. Fine, see you in Man City, Kiran said, hanging up the phone with a decisive snap. Ailes was furious, but at least the arrangement was made. Still in Kiran's arms, Lindsay looked up at him anxiously. I want to go with you. Kiran shook his head. I'll go alone. You. Before he could finish, Lindsay covered his mouth with her hand, her expression very serious. I must go with you. They're my parents. We live or die together. Seeing the determination in Lindsay's eyes, Kiran couldn't refuse and nodded. Lindsay's face lit up with happiness. Kiran checked the time and said, "Let's head back to the villa first. I need to arrange things with Snow Xander and Lillian Yanes." Thinking about Snow, whom he hadn't seen yet, filled Kiran with longing. Lindsay nodded, and they headed back to the villa together. Snow, Lillian Yanes, Aoki Cosner, Jenny Leo, and Yvonne Quinn were already waiting in the living room when they arrived. They had been aware of Konta Yasuda's visit but didn't intervene, knowing Kiran could handle it alone. After bathing, the women had gathered, eager to reunite with Kiran. Snow was especially filled with deep longing, constantly touching her abdomen. At that moment, Kiran entered the living room with Lindsay. Unable to contain herself, Snow rushed toward Kiran. Chapter 10:92. Kiran York's eyes lit up when he saw Snow Xander. He opened his arms and hugged her tightly, very tightly. There was no need for words. Hubby, sob, sob. Snow could only call out once before bursting into tears. Her face was filled with longing, and her sobs carried complex emotions. Kiran gently embraced Snow and softly patted her shoulder, saying, "I missed you too." With those words, Snow's emotions overflowed. Love flowed naturally. Snow's body trembled continuously. The expressions of the other women in the room were complicated, especially Jenny Leo, whose eyes showed a hint of jealousy. Even though she spent the most time with Kiran among these women, it was never enough for her. She wished she could be with him all the time. Seeing Kiran so close to his wife, Snow, she knew it was only right, but she couldn't hide her inner disappointment. Lillian Yanes walked over, looking at Kiran and studying his expression, and asked, "Is Lady Meiji dead?" Hearing Lillian's question about Lady Meiji, Kiran loosened his grip on Snow a bit and responded with a serious tone, "I'm not sure, but I don't think she's dead." Kiran's slow and heavy tone was noticeable towards the end, making it clear that he didn't want Lady Meiji to die. The women, sensitive as they were, noticed this. They didn't know exactly what happened between Kiran and Lady Meiji, but as women, they understood that anything could happen after 2 months of close companionship. Aware of the others' concerns, Snow playfully pinched Kiran under his arm and said, "You must have fallen for Lady Meiji, hoping she isn't dead, right?" Kiran chuckled at Snow's rare display of jealousy. He hugged her tightly again, then walked to the sofa, where he sat down and addressed everyone. "I do hope she isn't dead." The other women's faces changed, and they looked at Kiran with a mixture of anger and resentment. Kiran remained unbothered and began explaining his 2 months with Lady Meiji, detailing their time together and the 9 days of thunder trials on St. S Mountain. The women, who were initially jealous and angry, quickly lost those feelings. They could sense the bond and responsibility Kiran felt towards Lady Meiji. They were especially moved by his sense of duty, as facing death for someone else's sake was not something everyone could do. Jenny Leo, however, quickly let her jealousy resurface and pouted, "So, you were attracted to that old witch? No wonder you stayed up there for 2 months without coming down, so obedient." Facing Jenny's complaint, Kiran sighed helplessly and shook his head. "You think too much." "What do you mean I think too much?" "Ask the others if you don't believe me," Jenny continued, still pouting. The atmosphere became a bit awkward. At this critical moment, Yvonne Quinn stepped forward and asked her sister Lindsay Ludwig, "How are Mom and Dad? Are they safe?" Yvonne's question shifted everyone's focus to Lindsay, whose eyes turned red again. "Ailes took her parents to the west and told me to go to Man City within 7 days to save them," Kiran explained to everyone. Upon hearing this, everyone's faces showed concern. Snow also released Kiran, her eyes filled with reluctance. "Don't worry, I'll go to the west and solve this quickly. I'll be back soon," Kiran assured the women with a relaxed expression. "I want to go with you." Jenny Leo was the first to speak up. Yvonne Quinn quickly followed. "My parents are in danger. I have to go." Seeing the others wanting to go, Kiran sighed and said, "I'll take Yvonne and Lindsay. They are sisters and can look out for each other while rescuing their parents." Jenny pouted, about to protest, but Lillian Yanes pulled her aside, smiling and advising, "Jenny, let Kiran handle this quickly. The sooner he resolves this, the sooner he can be with you." Although filled with jealousy and unwillingness, Jenny reluctantly agreed. She had a high regard for Lillian. With Lillian's influence, the others also didn't insist on going. Kiran quickly briefed everyone on the situation, then spent one more night at the villa before heading to Man City. That night, he and Snow had an intense time together. Despite Snow's pregnancy, Kiran wanted to transfer some of his cultivation energy to her and their unborn child. Snow was still asleep when he left, but her body seemed to glow with a golden light. Kiran believed that with continued cultivation, Snow would become a powerful martial artist like Lillian and the others, and they would all lead a carefree life together. Filled with hope and excitement, Kiran departed, wishing happiness and safety for all the women. Lindsay had already arranged the tickets, so they smoothly boarded the plane at the airport. The three had seats together, with Kiran sitting between the two women. As soon as he boarded, he closed his eyes to rest, planning how to deal with Ailes once they arrived in Man City. As Kiran sat with his eyes closed, waiting for takeoff, he suddenly felt a strong tap on his shoulder. Startled, he realized it wasn't a woman's touch but a man's. Opening his eyes, he saw Yvonne Quinn smirking, while Lindsay Ludwig looked furious. In front of him stood a tall Caucasian glaring at Kiran in anger. "Move, I want this seat," the man demanded arrogantly. Kiran couldn't help but laugh. Chapter 1093. "Are you interested in my two companions?" Kiran York asked the man directly. The man was momentarily taken aback, not expecting Kiran to ask so bluntly. However, he soon assumed Kiran was scared and sneered with a mocking look in his eyes. "It seems you know your place, pig." "Yes, I'm interested in these two women. You don't deserve to sit here." His greedy gaze swept over Lindsay Ludwig and Yvonne Quinn as he spoke, particularly lingering on Lindsay's mature and enchanting face. Even though Yvonne had been with Kiran for some time, she still lacked the mature allure that Lindsay possessed. Had Lindsay not been worried about her parents, her charm would have been even more captivating. Kiran saw the man's lustful eyes and couldn't help but laugh coldly. "Do you think you're worthy? Kid, do you want to die?" Suddenly, a harsh voice in Dragonsland language came from behind Kiran, and he felt a rush of wind on his neck. The man in front of Kiran smirked contemptuously, thinking Kiran was foolish for not reacting to the threat behind him. He pointed his thumb downward, showing his disdain. Kiran casually flicked his finger without turning around, sending an invisible force outward. The person swinging a fist at him felt a sharp pain in his hand, as if pricked by a needle, and lost all strength. "Ouch!" the man cried out in pain, clutching his arm. Kiran turned to see a tall, muscular black man grimacing like a wounded beast. Ignoring him, Kiran turned back to the white man and calmly stood up. "Do you want to leave on your own, or do you need my help?" Infuriated by Kiran's words, the white man's anger surged to his head. "You damned beastard, I'll kill you." He swung his fist at Kiran. The man's large frame and anger made his punch seem powerful. Terrified passengers looked on in silence, some even pitying Kiran, thinking he was asking for trouble. Kiran didn't dodge. Instead, he smiled and without warning lifted his right foot and kicked the man in the stomach. "Ouch!" the man screamed in pain as he was sent flying like a kicked football, crashing toward the boarding gate. The black man behind Kiran, now terrified, tried to speak, but Kiran turned swiftly, grabbing him by the hair. "Ouch!" the black man screamed, bending over in pain and trying to get closer to Kiran. His face contorted with agony. Kiran said nothing as he dragged the black man outside by his hair, the man screaming like a dog being led on a leash. Kiran threw both the white man and the black man out. Initially wanting to intervene, the flight attendants hesitated upon seeing Kiran's imposing demeanor and the vulgar behavior of the two men, fearing more trouble on the plane. Other passengers, awestruck, remained silent, deeply impressed by Kiran's prowess. The plane took off, leaving the white man and black man behind. Kiran remained calm, considering the incident trivial. The white man, named Kojin, was furious. He was used to harassing women on this flight, and often bullied men who tried to stop him. He never imagined he would be beaten so badly today. Angrily, Kojin dialed a number on his phone. An elderly voice answered. "Kojin, what happened?" "Grandpa, I was planning to fly back to Man City, but I was beaten up and thrown off the plane," Kojin explained. Nicholas, his grandfather, was immediately enraged. As the head of a prominent Western family, the thought of his grandson being beaten and humiliated was intolerable. "Who did this?" "I don't know his name, but he was on this flight from Dragonsland." Kojin provided the flight details. Nicholas hung up and quickly made another call. "There's a young man on the flight from Dragonsland with two women. Make sure he never leaves Man City." Nicholas ended the call, already considering Kiran a dead man. Unaware of the powerful family behind Kojin, Kiran continued to rest peacefully on the plane. Yvonne Quinn and Lindsay Ludwig leaned on his shoulders, their scent filling his senses and slightly unsettling him. However, he maintained his composure, avoiding any inappropriate thoughts. Other passengers were envious, seeing the two stunning women with Kiran. Yet, remembering Kojin's fate, their envy turned to caution, realizing Kiran was not someone to be provoked. As the plane landed, Kiran opened his eyes. Yvonne and Lindsay also awoke, sitting up straight. Yvonne smiled, enjoying the peaceful journey, while Lindsay's expression was anxious and worried about her parents. After disembarking and taking the shuttle bus to the airport exit, they noticed something off. Many greeters stood far from the exit, while a group of men in black suits stood directly in front. These men, both white and black, exuded a cold, murderous aura. Kiran saw the men and thought of Kojin and the black man he had beaten. He smiled. Yvonne, also smiling, asked, "Should I handle them or will you?" "Do I need to deal with these small fries?" Kiran replied, amused by the thought of Yvonne's poison abilities. Yvonne gave Kiran a seductive smile. "Spend the night with me." Kiran glanced nervously at Lindsay, who seemed to be breathing heavily, her cheeks flushed. Yvonne, laughing, approached the men confidently. Chapter 1094. Beauty like jade, and a smile that could topple a city. At this moment, Yvonne Quinn embodied such allure. Having become a woman after being with Kiran, Yvonne exuded a captivating beauty. As she approached the men, her face deliberately displayed a charming smile. Her expression was both tender and seductive, evoking a frenzy of emotions in the men. Initially, the group of men was prepared to rush forward and kill them, but seeing Yvonne's graceful and flirtatious approach, their minds turned to another possibility. They thought Kiran was scared and wanted to use a woman to tempt them. With this thought, they became excited and eager, their eyes filled with lewd thoughts. As if sensing their thoughts, Yvonne lightly flicked her hair, enhancing her enchanting allure. This made them even more convinced of their assumption, and many started whistling at Yvonne, their faces filled with vulgar excitement. They seemed like a pack of wolves ready to pounce on the lamb walking towards them, prepared to devour her. Looking at Kiran with worry, Lindsay asked, "Is Yvonne going to be all right?" Observing the situation, Kiran also wanted to step in and quickly deal with these people, but he decided to wait and see who was behind this group. Given that a family capable of mobilizing so many people in Man City was no ordinary one, they might be connected to Ailes. So, he waited for Yvonne to poison them. Hearing Lindsay's concern, he smiled and said, "If you're worried, why not help Yvonne?" Lindsay shook her head and warned Kiran, "Those men look like a pack of hungry wolves." Kiran touched his nose, thinking, isn't it normal for men to have improper thoughts when they see beautiful women? Seeing Kiran not responding, Lindsay pouted and added, "Be careful. Yvonne might suffer and then you'll be wearing a green hat." Kiran was speechless, not expecting Lindsay's imagination to be so wild. However, he didn't mock her, appreciating her rare moment of relaxation. After her parents were kidnapped, Lindsay had been extremely tense, so it was good for her to unwind. Meanwhile, Yvonne was now less than a meter away from the men. She suddenly stumbled, her left foot tripping over her right, and her delicate body fell towards the men. "Ah!" Yvonne let out a frightened cry. The men, like ravenous wolves, rushed forward, eager to pounce on her, ready to devour her. Lindsay was terrified, her face pale with worry for Yvonne. Kiran smiled, seeing Yvonne's hand already raised. Yvonne's face now wore a calm smile. As she raised her hand, a colorless, odorless poison spread through the air. The men, unaware, soon felt itchy, painful, or nauseous. Their previous excitement and desires vanished, replaced by weakness and collapse. While Yvonne appeared to be falling, she somehow managed to stand up again, while the men around her fell to the ground. Standing there like a beautiful peacock, Yvonne radiated an aura of pride and beauty. The once ferocious men lay on the ground, some foaming at the mouth, others unconscious, scratching themselves bloody. Cries of pain filled the air, causing the onlookers to retreat in fear. With wide eyes and an innocent expression, Yvonne asked, "What happened to these people?" Her sweet question echoed, but no one answered. Everyone looked at her with terror, as if she were a demon. Yvonne, feigning innocence, shook her head and said, "How strange. I don't understand." Turning to Kiran and Lindsay, Yvonne's face showed a hint of a smile. Lindsay, stunned, felt like she was dreaming, unable to believe what had just happened. Kiran gently held Lindsay's waist, leading her to a taxi. After they got in and drove away, Yvonne also took a taxi to follow them. At the scene, the events seemed unrelated to Kiran and Lindsay, and Yvonne, a seemingly weak woman, left everyone bewildered. Even the people from the Nicholas family, watching from their car, were shocked, unable to comprehend how Yvonne had acted. Upon arriving in Man City's downtown area, Kiran, Lindsay, and Yvonne checked into Ailes Hotel. Kiran and Lindsay shared a room while Yvonne took the one next door. They had entered separately, so no one knew they were together. In their room, Lindsay, now relaxed, asked excitedly, "Are we sharing a room?" Seeing her excitement, Kiran teased, "Aren't you worried about your parents anymore?" Lindsay smiled. I was worried, but after seeing how powerful Yvonne is and knowing you haven't even acted yet, I'm not scared anymore. Kiran sighed, feeling both amused and helpless. Lindsay, her face full of charm, suggested, to show my gratitude, why don't I accompany you? She started to undress as she spoke. Kiran. Chapter 1095. Kiran's mind buzzed. Was Lindsay trying to seduce him? Kiran had no interest or intention of that sort. He hurriedly turned around and left the room. Lindsay watched his retreating figure with a triumphant smile. She had been trying to scare Kiran. She wasn't that bold. Despite her worries about her parents' safety, she couldn't understand Kiran's intentions and tried to tempt him to get the truth. But he ran away. Kiran didn't go to Yvonne's room but went downstairs instead. As he descended, he noticed a blonde woman with blue eyes entering the lobby. This woman was about 175 meters tall, wearing a short yellow skirt that exposed her long, fair legs and yellow high heels. She looked enticing, tall, and elegant, with a curvy figure that exuded feminine allure. Kiran couldn't help but think of how Yasuda had arranged women to disturb his rest in Sunland, and wondered if this was another of Aile's vile schemes. He deliberately slowed his steps to see what the woman was up to. She didn't notice him as she approached the front desk and inquired about a room. Kiran wasn't very fluent in the language she spoke, but he caught the room number, which was Yvonne's room. This surprised him, as he didn't expect the woman to be looking for Yvonne. After asking about the room, the woman didn't go upstairs but instead turned around and left. Kiran followed her out. She walked to a sports car and got in, closing the convertible top and pulling out her phone to make a call. She didn't see Kiran approach because she was focused on closing the roof and making the call. He calmly opened the car door and got in, acting as if it were his own car. The roof of the car closed, sealing it off. The woman saw Kiran and was shocked. She reached down to her slender leg, drew a gleaming knife without a word, and thrust it at Kiran. He didn't dodge but raised his right hand, catching the knife between his index and middle fingers just before it reached him. With a faint smile. The woman's expression changed instantly, not expecting Kiran to be so formidable. In a cold voice, she asked, "Who are you?" Kiran, hearing her speak in Dragonsland, though with a slight accent, was curious. "Someone interested in you," he replied. The woman, taken aback by his light-hearted response, frowned with anger. Without another word, she twisted the knife, trying to cut Kiran's fingers off. With a slight exertion of force, the knife snapped in half. Holding the broken knife, the woman stared at Kiran in shock at his strength. "Tell me who you people are, and I'll spare your life," Kiran said calmly, twirling the broken knife in his hand like a toy. The woman's expression shifted repeatedly as she stared at the knife, contemplating her next move against Kiran. "Don't bother thinking about it. You're not my match." "Dealing with you is as easy as lifting a finger," Kiran said as if seeing through her thoughts. "Why did you provoke Kojin?" The woman asked coldly. "Kojin?" Kiran mused, then asked, "The white man with the black guy on the plane?" Seeing that the woman was a blonde with blue eyes, he naturally assumed Kojin was the white man. "Yes, his name is Kojin, and I'm Katie, his sister." "Why did you attack him?" Katie asked icily, her eyes fixed on Kiran, ready to strike again. Kiran's expression changed slightly before he laughed at Katie. Not getting a response, she swung the broken knife at his throat, her movements swift and lethal. Kiran didn't dodge but grabbed her arms instead. Katie was stunned by his quick and agile response. Kiran leaned closer, feigning a lewd gesture. Katie's face turned pale with fear as she yelled, "You pervert! What are you doing?" Hearing her accusation, Kiran didn't get angry but moved even closer, almost pinning her down. The car's small space left Katie pressed against the seat back, unable to move or avoid him. Her wide eyes showed her desire to kill Kiran, but she was helpless. "Did you think I was going to assault you?" Kiran asked calmly, releasing her. Feeling relieved, Katie stared at him and asked, "Aren't you, you pervert?" Kiran chuckled. "It seems you have a robber's mindset." "What do you mean?" she asked. "Your brother Kojin wanted to do the same to my women. Wasn't I right to deal with him?" Katie's expression changed, feeling speechless. "You know what kind of person your brother is. Don't act like he's innocent." Katie quickly regained her composure and said, "Our family isn't to be trifled with." Kiran laughed at her persistence in her robber's logic. "If you're not to be trifled with, then be less trifling." With that, Kiran slashed down Katie's body with the knife. Her clothes split in half with a ripping sound. Katie screamed and quickly covered herself. "You bastard! Perverted scum!" Kiran looked at her with a calm smile. "If you think I'm a pervert for this, then what about your brother's vile actions and having people intercept us at the airport? Isn't that worse?" Katie, hearing his question, felt her face change color. Kiran's expression turned serious and cold. Don't use your robber's mindset and logic to judge others, or else. With a swift motion, Kiran's hand struck. Katie screamed in pain as blood spurted from her leg. Kiran got out of the car and walked away. Katie stared dumbfounded at her long, slender leg, now bleeding profusely. Chapter 1096. A fresh wound appeared on Katie's leg, only about a centimeter long. She was stunned. The depth, force, and width of the cut were perfect, like a dragonfly skimming the water, a clear warning. Despite the pain and blood, Katie felt a chill down her spine as she watched Kiran's retreating figure. If he had wanted to kill her, she would be dead. Fear welled up in Katie's heart. Facing someone like him as an enemy would be a disaster. She hesitated for a moment, then started the car and drove away from the Ailes Hotel. Kiran returned upstairs to Yvonne's room. She was watching TV, looking relaxed. Seeing Kiran enter, she teased, "I thought you went for a romantic encounter. This is the third time already. We usually let it go after 2 strikes, but this time, we're giving them a chance," Kiran said, referring to the warnings he had given Kojin and Katie, hoping their enemies would behave. Yvonne frowned slightly, pondering Kiran's words. "We haven't made a move yet. Where do we start looking for Ailes?" Kiran remained calm. "Just wait for news. Ailes knows we're here and is definitely watching us." Yvonne nodded, then asked, "The people we offended today, do you think they'll join forces with Ailes?" Kiran sneered, "If they want to die, they're welcome to try. We don't mind." Yvonne snapped her fingers and smiled. "That's the man I love, so confident and powerful." Kiran rolled his eyes at her. "Enough. Let's not talk about this anymore. Should we take the initiative?" "Initiative in what? Going to bed?" Yvonne lay on the sofa in a suggestive pose, her eyes sparkling seductively. Kiran almost choked. "We should find out more about Kojin and Katie's family background." "Not interested. I thought you wanted to sleep with me." Yvonne looked disappointed and annoyed. Kiran ignored her and headed for the door. "Wait, I'll come with you." Yvonne quickly got up and followed him out. They left the hotel with Lindsay. As they exited, they saw a group of people getting out of cars and heading into the hotel. The 3 of them exchanged glances, understanding the purpose of these newcomers. Kiran led them toward the cars the group had just exited. Katie, limping slightly due to her leg wound, was about to enter the hotel when she saw Kiran, Lindsay, and Yvonne. She trembled and took a step back. Kiran smiled slightly. "It seems your family doesn't want to settle this quietly. They want to escalate it, right?" Katie's eyes showed a hint of helplessness. Upon returning, she had informed her family, but her grandfather had insisted on taking down Kiran and his companions, leading to this new confrontation. "Come with us. We'll be safer with you," Yvonne said, walking up to Katie. Katie instinctively drew a new knife, but it was quickly rendered useless by Yvonne's poison, leaving her weak. "Get in the car. We're going to visit your family," Kiran said, heading toward Katie's car. This time, it was a sedan. Yvonne and Lindsay sat in the back, with Kiran in the front passenger seat. After being given an antidote, Katie regained her strength but was even more fearful, knowing they could easily control her fate. Holding the steering wheel, Katie hesitated, pondering her next move. "I don't want to waste time. I'm not interested in dealing with your family," Kiran said coldly, sensing her hesitation. "Who are you people? Why are you here?" Katie asked warily. "I'm here to find Ailes," Kiran replied. Katie's expression changed to one of shock. "I'm here because Ailes wants to meet me," Kiran explained. "I have 2 friends that Ailes has taken. I'm here to bring them back," he added. Katie understood that Ailes had kidnapped Kiran's friends, but couldn't fathom why he was telling her this so openly. Even Lindsay and Yvonne looked at Kiran curiously. Kiran remained calm and smiled. He knew he was leading Katie into a trap, using her and her family as pawns to achieve his goals. Just as Katie was about to speak, her phone rang. It was her grandfather. Katie answered quickly. "Have you found them? Bring them back alive to save our people." Nicholas's angry voice came through the phone. Katie's face changed instantly. Chapter 1097. Katie looked nervously at Kiran York. Kiran remained calm, looking at Katie. "I suppose your people are already poisoned and suffering." Katie's face showed both tension and confusion. She glanced at Kiran and said, "I advise you to treat those people quickly, or you'll face severe consequences." Kiran laughed at the threat. Yvonne Quinn, standing nearby, found this hard to tolerate. She glanced at Katie's beautiful face and sneered, "My husband isn't someone who can be threatened, nor is he easily scared." Katie felt a wave of cold amusement as she heard Yvonne emphasize husband. She was merely stating the obvious. Her expression didn't escape Kiran's notice. He calmly said, "I don't know much about your family, nor do I wish to, but what you've done is already excessive." Excessive? Katie's face turned cold. Would it have happened if you hadn't hit Kojin? Yvonne was about to lose her temper, but Kiran raised his hand to stop her. If you insist on your bandit logic, go ahead. We'll talk later. With that, Kiran closed his eyes and ignored them. Katie was annoyed hearing Kiran mention bandit logic again, but she said nothing. She drove towards her family home. Meanwhile, Nicholas Ailes and Horace Moore were gathered in the Nicholas family hall. Nicholas's face was as dark as water. He felt both angry and humiliated that so many of his family members were injured and poisoned. As a top family, their status alone commanded respect from many. But now, with his grandson beaten and his people poisoned, their reputation was in shambles. "Horace, do you know what kind of poison this is?" Ailes asked Horace. "This is goo poison from the Maui tribe in Dragonsland. It's highly contagious, but the poisoner was skilled enough to control its spread," Horace said, looking at Nicholas. Nicholas's eyes showed a flash of fear at the mention of goo poison, but his anger grew. "I've already asked Katie to bring them here. If they don't provide an antidote, I'll kill them all." Ailes felt a surge of joy but remained silent. Horace, hearing Kiran was coming, felt a chill of fear. He knew he wasn't Kiran's match, and Kiran would surely kill him if they met. However, he said nothing, glancing at Ailes. Ailes, seeing Horace's concern, pondered for a moment. Deciding that Horace was still useful, he said, "Go back to your place and fetch some things for me." Horace sighed in relief and stood up. "Yes, Mr. Ailes, I'll go now." Horace nodded to Nicholas and left. Unsuspecting of Horace's fear, Nicholas was still seething, waiting for Kiran to arrive for his revenge. Ailes remained calm. With Finn Ludwig and Maxine Danes as hostages, he believed Kiran couldn't do much. He hoped the conflict between Kiran and the Nicholas family would escalate, giving him a better opportunity to benefit from the chaos. Half an hour later, Katie drove into the family estate. The Nicholas family estate, located in the suburbs and surrounded by water and mountains, looked like a secluded paradise, with lush trees adding to its tranquility. Kiran looked at the scenic view outside the car window, then glanced at Katie, puzzled. "With such a good life, why does your family stir up trouble?" Katie didn't quite understand Kiran's words and curiously asked, "What trouble are we stirring?" Yvonne chuckled from the back seat. "Going against us is just courting death, isn't it?" Katie was infuriated by their arrogance and glared at Yvonne, thinking they'd soon get their comeuppance. Yvonne, unfazed, looked at Kiran and said, "Should I raise some GU worms in these woods to make their family disappear?" "Don't be reckless," Katie said, feeling a surge of fear at the thought of her family mysteriously collapsing, and quickly tried to stop her. Kiran shook his head with a smile. Yvonne also smiled. She was just helping Kiran pressure Katie. Though Katie knew little about goo poison, she felt an inexplicable worry. If the poison were easy to handle, her grandfather wouldn't have asked her to bring Kiran back. After another 10 minutes, the car stopped at the villa's entrance. As soon as they stopped, a group of men in black suits with bulging weapons at their waists approached them. Their faces were cold and indifferent, as if they didn't care whether the people in the car lived or died. Kiran noticed them and smirked, then turned to Katie, who was unbuckling her seatbelt. "If I were to kidnap you, do you think they'd save you?" Katie was startled and quickly turned to Kiran. "You want to kidnap me?" Kiran nodded with a smile. "Yes, I do," Katie was furious. "You!" Before she could finish, Kiran grabbed her from the driver's seat and put her onto his lap. "You rogue, let me go!" Katie shouted and struggled, trying to pull out a dagger to stab Kiran. However, Kiran had already stuck a silver needle in her, making her docile. Kiran got out of the car with Katie in his arms. Yvonne and Lindsay Ludwig followed suit. The approaching bodyguards were stunned to see Katie being carried. They stopped in their tracks, not expecting her to be so close to Kiran, yet clearly under his control. "Quick, tell Grandpa I'm being held hostage," Katie shouted at the stunned bodyguards, her eyes full of fear and panic. The bodyguards, realizing the situation, grew tense and drew their guns, aiming at Kiran. Someone ran off to tell Nicholas. Nicholas and Ailes were having tea in the living room, waiting for Kiran. When they heard that Katie was taken hostage at the villa entrance, Nicholas smashed his teacup in anger and rushed out. Ailes, equally shocked, followed him. Seeing Kiran holding Katie, Nicholas roared, "Let go of my granddaughter or I'll kill you." Chapter 1098. Kiran York looked at Nicholas, a tall, elderly man with graying hair, but well-maintained and with a healthy, ruddy complexion. Even in anger, he held a cigar, exuding an aura of authority. Kiran ignored Nicholas's fury and turned his attention to Ailes. Alice met Kiran's gaze with a mocking smile. I didn't expect someone like you, Kiran York, to resort to kidnapping. Kiran smirked. I learned from you. Ailes's expression changed as he defensively replied, You kidnapped Katie first. How is that learning from me? Kiran calmly shook his head. I truly learned from you. Ailes's face grew tense, worried about Kiran exposing him. Nicholas's expression darkened. Kiran smiled at Nicholas. Ailes kidnapped my friend's parents, so I kidnapped your granddaughter. Nicholas's curiosity grew. Kiran's disregard for his threats and focus on Ailes made him suspicious. He turned to look at Ailes. Ailes felt the pressure, and a flash of anger showed in his eyes. With their deep heritage and strength, the Nicholas family was his chosen ally against Kiran. Upon hearing of the family's poisoning, he feigned concern to incite conflict between them and Kiran. However, he hadn't anticipated Kiran would retaliate with his own kidnapping. Ailes, unable to directly offend the Nicholas family, quickly explained, Mr. Nicholas, I have a grudge against Kiran York. That's why I want to join forces with you to deal with him. Nicholas, no fool, sensed the deception and remained silent, his face cold. Ailes grew more anxious. He directed his frustration at Kiran. Kiran York, isn't it shameful to bully a woman? Kiran ignored him and gently handed Katie over to Yvonne Quinn. Now free from Kiran's hold, Katie felt an unexpected sense of loss. Being in his arms gave her a strange feeling of security and joy. She quickly shook off these thoughts, her cheeks reddening with anger as she glared at Kiran. Kiran smiled at Nicholas. Ailes said he wants to join you against me. Why don't you let him make the first move? Ailes's head buzzed. This was a death sentence. He knew Kiran's terrifying strength. Remembering Horace Moore fleeing upon hearing of Kiran's arrival, Ailes regretted not leaving earlier. Nicholas's expression shifted several times. He stared at Alice. Since you said you'd deal with Kiran York, go ahead. Nicholas stepped back, giving Ailes space. Ailes felt even more awkward. His earlier bravado diminished. He glanced at his men who all retreated, fearing Kiran. Now, Ailes, Kiran said with a smile. Ailes couldn't muster the courage. His face burned with embarrassment, his lie exposed. Standing there, he had no reason or confidence to be arrogant. Mr. Nicholas, we have no deep hatred between us. Your granddaughter is in my hands, Kiran said to Nicholas. Nicholas's eyes darted, his gaze complex. He was furious at Ailes's manipulation, but equally angry at Kiran. However, his priority was the safety of his poisoned family members. Despite never directly confronting Kiran, seeing his poisoned people filled him with dread. Ailes's visible fear and dread made Nicholas realize Kiran was no simple opponent. Nicholas turned to Ailes. Mr. Ailes, I suggest you act quickly to resolve this. Ailes, urged by Nicholas, felt desperate and angry. His face contorted with frustration as he glared at Kiran. Kiran York, do you intend to crush us with your martial strength and threaten us? Ailes looked to Nicholas, exaggerating. Mr. Nicholas, Kiran's arrogance and conceit are an insult to us all. Nicholas didn't refute Ailes's words, feeling similarly humiliated. However, he suppressed his anger with his granddaughter's safety at stake. If you think I'm using force to intimidate you, let's exchange hostages first. Then you can challenge me with your experts, Kiran suggested. Ailes clenched his fists, glaring at Kiran but unwilling to lose his leverage. Kiran turned to Nicholas. You don't have the strength to kill me. If you won't agree to a duel, do you want to watch your granddaughter die? As Kiran finished, Yvonne Quinn brought out a live centipede, ready to place it on Katie's face. Katie screamed in terror, her face pale. Nicholas's rage boiled over. He suddenly turned and slapped Ailes across the face. Chapter 1099. Slap! A crisp sound echoed through the room, capturing everyone's attention. Ah! Ailes screamed, clutching his right cheek. His gaze immediately turned to Nicholas, filled with anger and humiliation. He hadn't expected Nicholas to hit him so suddenly and brutally. Release them. Nicholas's tone was icy and commanding, leaving no room for argument. Ailes's eyes flared with anger and humiliation while the bodyguards behind him straightened up. It was clear that Ailes found Nicholas's violent outburst hard to accept. Do you have a problem with that? Nicholas asked in a deep, authoritative voice. In an instant, the York family members' eyes were all on Ailes, and the guns that were pointed at Kiran York were now aimed at Ailes. Ailes's fury surged for a moment before he reined it in. He looked angrily at Kiran and said, Even if I let the hostages go, there's no guarantee you'll release Nicholas's granddaughter, Katie. Rest assured, Kiran responded firmly. As soon as you release Finn Ludwig and Maxine Danes, I will immediately let Katie go. Ailes was still reluctant, turning to Nicholas. He kidnapped your granddaughter to blackmail you. Otherwise, why would he trade Katie for Finn and Maxine? Nicholas's brow furrowed in confusion as he looked back at Kiran for an explanation. Kiran smiled at Nicholas. If I'm not mistaken, Ailes came with Horace Moore. Horace has already left. A collective gasp filled the room as Kiran scanned the villa, seemingly looking for Horace. Horace's distinct appearance and commanding presence left a lasting impression on everyone. They were shocked that Kiran, without seeing him, could deduce his presence. Ailes's face contorted with rage as he asked, "How did you know Horace was here?" Kiran calmly replied, "I came to rescue Finn and Maxine, but also to kill Horace Moore." "To kill Horace?" Alice asked, regret seeping into his voice. He wished he had kept Horace around. He might be safe if Horace died. Kiran nodded firmly. "I'd rather kill Horace than you." "Why? Why do you want to kill him?" Ailes searched desperately for a reason to save his life. "Because Horace has no shame serving people like you." Kiran's eyes were cold, filled with disdain. Although he cursed Horace, Ailes felt the sting of the words too. "Anyone who collaborates with scum like you, I will kill on sight." Kiran's voice was laced with menace. Ailes felt the chill of Kiran's killing intent and didn't dare to retort. Kiran turned to Nicholas. "I have no patience. If I don't see Finn and Maxine in half an hour then." Kiran's unspoken threat hung heavy in the air, his murderous aura palpable. Nicholas, equally furious, glared at Ailes. "Release them immediately or else." Feeling wronged and infuriated, Ailes knew if he handed over Finn and Maxine, Kiran might kill him next. They were his lifeline. Ailes glanced at Kiran and said, "If I release the hostages, will you agree to a duel?" Kiran nodded. "Of course. As long as your people dare to challenge, I'll be here waiting." Ailes turned to Nicholas. "Can your family tolerate this humiliation from Kiran?" Brimming with anger, Nicholas finally looked at Kiran. "If you have the guts, stay here and face our challenges." "Rest assured, I'll stay here until no one dares to come out," Kiran said, then walked over to Yvonne Quinn, leading her to the pavilion in Nicholas's home, where they sat calmly. Kiran's demeanor was relaxed, as if unconcerned about the Nicholas family. Furious and humiliated, Nicholas clenched his fists. "Bring them to me within half an hour." Feeling like a subordinate, Ailes had to endure humiliation and immediately called to arrange Finn and Maxine's release. Kiran breathed a sigh of relief. Once Finn and Maxine were safe, everything else would be easier to handle. Ailes's call was answered promptly, and his men began to bring Finn and Maxine to Nicholas's home. Meanwhile, Horace returned to where Finn and Maxine were held. Seeing them being taken away, he asked, "Where are you taking them?" But, aware of Horace's respect for Ailes, Ailes's men answered honestly, "As per Mr. Ailes's orders, we're taking them to Nicholas's home." Horace, sensing something amiss, asked, "Why?" When Horace heard they were going to send Finn and Maxine to Nicholas's house, his heart skipped a beat, and he had a bad feeling. Especially when he thought about how Kiran was rushing over. Could it be that Ailes had agreed to return the hostages to Kiran? He was still hoping that Ailes and the others would fight Kiran to the death and injure Kiran so that he could obtain the power of the dragon vein. Horace naturally did not want to lose the hostage. He pretended to nod, looked at the two of them and said, "Thank you for your hard work." Ailes's men didn't suspect anything and were about to leave. Suddenly they felt their necks being grabbed. Before they could shout, a crisp sound of bones breaking was heard, and their bodies fell to the ground. Horace picked up Finn and Maxine and disappeared. Kiran watched the clock. Half an hour had passed, and no one had arrived. He stood up, his eyes cold and filled with rage. Nicholas's expression turned anxious and tense. Ailes's face went pale. Kiran slowly walked towards Ailes, his anger growing with each step. Chapter 1100. Ailes's expression changed slightly as he watched Kiran York, his body instinctively starting to retreat. "Where are they?" Kiran stepped forward, his face emotionless and his tone icy cold. I just made the call to arrange it," Ailes responded, his voice trembling. "Slap!" Kiran raised his hand and slapped Ailes. "Ah!" Ailes let out a scream as his body was about to collapse to the ground. Bang! Kiran grabbed Ailes by the front of his shirt. "Do you think I'm joking with you? Wasting time?" Kiran's tone grew even colder. Ailes felt like he had fallen into an ice cellar, his face filled with fear and paleness. Thinking of his brother's death, he was terrified that Kiran would kill him on the spot. He shook his head desperately and said, No, it's not like that." At this moment, Ailes had lost all his previous arrogance from when he called Kiran from the cruise ship. Facing Kiran now, he wished he could kneel and beg for mercy. Nicholas and his family remained silent, their eyes cold, clearly irritated by Kiran's dominance. However, they were more furious with Ailes, feeling used by him. "Call again immediately!" Kiran's voice remained low and cold. Ailes, trembling, took out his phone and began dialing his people. Unfortunately, no one answered. A bad feeling washed over Kiran. "Take me to find Finn Ludwig now." Kiran grabbed Ailes and headed towards Katie's car. Cold sweat broke out on Ailes' forehead as he realized something was wrong. Nicholas furrowed his brow tightly, watching Kiran and the others without saying a word. "Kiran, what about the poisoned people in my family?" Katie shouted anxiously. Yvonne Quinn's face was filled with anger. She grabbed Katie and said, "You should be more concerned about what will happen to you." She led Katie and Lindsay Ludwig towards the car. Ailes hoped Nicholas would step in to stop Kiran, but Nicholas did nothing, not even when his granddaughter was taken away. This left the Nicholas family confused too. Kiran and the others drove away. Nicholas's eyes narrowed slightly, a cold smile flashing in his eyes that no one noticed. He appeared relieved as he turned back to the living room, ignoring the situation. However, that cold smile did not escape Kiran's notice. Kiran was testing Nicholas, knowing he was a cunning man, but at this moment, Kiran couldn't afford to worry about Nicholas. He needed to ensure the safety of Finn Ludwig and his wife. Ailes's life was now in Kiran's hands, so he obediently led them to where Finn Ludwig and his wife were being held. It was another villa in the suburbs, less luxurious than the Nicholas family villa, but still quite grand. When they arrived at the villa, it was eerily quiet. Kiran took a deep breath, and his expression changed. His eyes were growing cold. Horace Moore had been here, and a scent of blood was in the air. Thud. Kiran forcefully threw Ailes to the ground, his face anxious as he quickly walked into the villa. Inside, he found 2 bodies lying in pools of blood. He extended his senses, searching for Finn Ludwig and his wife, but the villa was empty, with no sign of life. Ailes, fearing for his life, followed Kiran inside. Seeing his men dead, he turned pale with fear and asked anxiously, Who killed them? Slap. An enraged Kiran backhanded Ailes. Damn it. Ouch. Ailes cried out in pain, his body slamming into the wall. Does it hurt? Ailes whimpered in pain. Will my parents be okay? Lindsay Ludwig asked Kiran anxiously. Kiran's face was dark and cold. He turned to the wailing Ailes and asked angrily, Where did you and Horace Moore go after coming here? Ailes stopped crying and shook his head desperately, saying, Nowhere else, just here in Nicholas's house. Kiran's eyes narrowed as he looked at Ailes. Search all of Man City for Horace immediately. Ailes guessed that Horace had killed his men and taken Finn Ludwig and his wife. Feeling betrayed, he was furious. He quickly pulled out his phone and ordered his people to search for Horace throughout Man City. Meanwhile, Horace had taken Finn Ludwig and his wife to an empty house in the suburbs. Since he was highly skilled in martial arts, no one noticed him taking them into the house. They were hiding in the basement undetected. Ailes's men searched everywhere but couldn't find Horace. Growing nervous, Ailes turned to Kiran and said, We can't find Horace anywhere. Maybe he's... Slap. Kiran, enraged, slapped Ailes again. This time, Ailes was prepared for the hit. He didn't cry out or fall, standing still like a subordinate accepting his leader's reprimand. No matter what it takes, find Horace immediately or you will die, Kiran said coldly. Ailes trembled in fear, feeling like an ant that Kiran could crush at any moment. Don't worry, I'll arrange for more people to search immediately. Ailes frantically made another call, angrily ordering his people to speed up the search. Kiran waited silently, his face dark and cold as water. Katie, growing impatient, shouted at Kiran, Hurry up and arrange for someone to save my family or they'll all die. What does their life or death have to do with us? Yvonne Quinn asked coldly. Katie was furious but helpless. Kiran's eyes lit up as he turned to Katie and said, Call your grandfather.